Morning all. I have a very interesting game of Per-fect, who you may not have heard of before. Per-fect was born in November 27th, 1934. He was the Norwegian champion in 1961. Of course, we know that the great Magnus Carlsen is Norwegian. So Per-fect, how good was he? He was up against a grandmaster at the time in a zonal tournament. Per-fect wasn't actually a titled player, and his grandmaster was Wolfgang Uhlmann, who was born around the same time as him, March 29, 1935, so a year later than him, about the same age. Uhlmann was born in Dresden, taught to play chess when he was about 11, awarded IM title in 1956, GM title in 1959, World Championship candidate in 1971, but was eliminated by Bent Larsen at the quarter-final stage. Uhlmann was East German champion in 1955, 58, 64, 68, 75, 76, 81 and 1985. And added to this, he was a notable authority on the French defence, having played it almost exclusively against e4 throughout his career. And actually that's why I think this channel really needs to check out the French defence games of Wolfgang Uhlmann. I think they'll be of great strategic value, because the French defence by its nature is a very closed opening, relatively closed opening. But in this game, okay, let's see what happened when the kind of amateur player but Norwegian champion nevertheless, Per-fect, ventured with e4. What did the great Uhlmann play? Of course, he played the French defence. He's a major leading exponent. So credit to Per-fect already, not trying to avoid the French defence. And he actually plays the Tarrasch variation now, knight d2. And Wolfgang chooses c5. So none of this knight f6. He's not inviting closing the centre. He wants to maximise piece activity with c5. And he doesn't mind the isolated queen's pawn. That could be a problem. But sometimes you can even avoid the isolating queen's pawn. You don't need to take on d5 with a pawn. And this is demonstrated here. After e takes d5, Black keeps his structure intact and doesn't mind losing a few tempo. Tempo with queen takes d5. If the queen gets kicked around, well, Black doesn't have any structural issues to look, to worry about. This is a strong structure. There's no isolated queen's pawn. Okay, so what is there to worry about? Knight gf3, and it's well known that Black temporarily wins a pawn on d4. And White tries to win that back soon, usually. Bishop c4, queen d6 is played. White castles, and now knight c6. It looks all fairly standard stuff so far. Nothing to worry about from the great exponent of the French defence, who's, by the way, also beaten Fischer as one of his many victims. Uhlmann's beaten Fischer on the black side for the French defence. So rook e1, a6. And now White plays a4, so preventing Black, for example, from b5, and it might also have some other perks to it. Queen c7, and this next move, knight e4, leaves a piece slightly loose, but it's not entirely clear how that could be exploited from the queen on c7 at this position. Black might consider developing its kingside, but this was played instead. Bishop d7. White regains the pawn, and we see bishop e7. Okay, is there any problem for Black? Well, White thought there was a problem with the Black position, and not particularly trusting of his GM opponent, even though it's a French defence. He played a very aggressive move now as White. I wonder if you can spot it if I give you 10 seconds starting from now. Okay, well, the Black king's still in the centre, so that's a clue. Knight f5, and you might have guessed this move, but maybe not the continuation. It's very difficult to see, I believe, the continuation of this. Okay, it's a piece sacrifice. It somehow involves the Black king, so let's see. If Black doesn't do anything well, g7's hanging, doesn't want to lose the dark square bishop, but g7 as well, d6 is being probed as well. So it's taken. And you might ask, well, so what, really? White's lost the piece. What has he got for it so far? Well, after knight d6 check, king f8 is played. And he takes another pawn. But still, is this enough? What compensation has white really got here? He's invested a piece. Surely he doesn't really have compensation here, because this knight, even if it wins the rook, is kind of trappable. And black's next move kind of indicates that, really, with bishop e8. By cutting off that f7 square, if the knight really does take the rook, surely black is going to be fine here. Okay, but there's a big surprise here, a very surprising move in this position. I wonder if you can spot it if I give you 10 seconds starting from now. Okay, Queen d5, and the reason, well, I think this is slightly surprising, is that you'd think the queen can be attacked in all sorts of ways here, and I think we need to examine these ways of attacking the queen in the second pass. For example, knight f6 is one way. In the game, the queen was attacked with queen a5, which also has the added benefit of being a double attack. So what can white do here? He doesn't really want to exchange off queens, for sure, does he? And you might think, well, hold on a sec. What is actually going on here? If the queen moves it, can it be also harassed again? Well, the queen actually goes to, well, the only square which protects the rook now, as well as getting out of the way of the fire of the black queen. It goes to e6. But can't it be attacked again? Surely there's other ways of attacking the queen here. If this queen is evicted, then bishop takes f7, and then that's the end of the game. Okay, and black plays a very natural centralizing move with tempo, it seems. Knight d4, very natural looking move. Knight d4. Try and get the queen away from protecting f7. Okay. So Uhlmann might be asking, who is this bunny? I'm just going to wipe him out with bishop takes f7. But, okay, the bunny has a little surprise here. The untitled player. He's a good player, Norwegian champion, but not a title player. But just very, very good in Norway, obviously. But what does he play here? Very, very resourceful move indeed is played in this position. If I give you 10 seconds starting from now. Okay, the move knight g5 is played, and it's got some very, very naughty threats associated with it. Okay, so what is white threatening after knight g5? If I gave you 10 seconds in this position, I hope you can spot what white is threatening. It's quite a naughty threat. Well, there's actually two quite naughty, equally powerful threats in this position that black needs to parry immediately. So, if white had another move, this is the question here. What would you play as white? Okay, white has two threats here. Queen takes g8. And if rook takes, there's knight takes 7, that's mating. And also more simply, knight takes h7, rook takes, queen takes g8. Both threatening mate, clearly. So black has to do something about that. So does he want to take the queen? There's options here. Take the knight. He ends up taking the knight, actually. Now we'll look at taking the queen in the second pass. But he takes the knight. And now we see queen d6 check. And you might wonder, what's the point of this? Isn't black adequately guarded? White has got 3 attacking pieces, it seems, or is it more? Black plays bishop e7. And what does white play here? You might wonder. If I give you 10 seconds now, can you see not only the move but also the continuation? So 10 seconds now, you might want to pause the video. Okay, it's important to note also that the queen is attacking the rook is loose here. So the rook's used here, rook takes e7, getting out of the way. And there's a back row issue as well, so white can't play slowly here. After knight takes e7, now here, what would white play in this position? If I give you 10 seconds starting from now. Can you spot it? It's a beauty. Check for forcing moves. White has queen f6 check here. There's this attacking piece, actually, which comes into its own here. If bishop f7, we just take on f7. If g takes, we have bishop h6. But apparently, according to my game score here from, I think, chessgames.com, it's black actually resigned seeing this. After rook takes e7, the GM saw this and didn't allow this very pretty finish, which provides some mystery. What happened here? Knight takes e7. The beautiful move is not played here. Queen f6. But that will be the beautiful finish. Now white did, like catch the big fish there. Just the king in the center was caught out. Let's check that out. But black is meant to be a leading exponent in the French defense. Where did he go wrong in this variation? This must surely have all been played before up to here. So we'll take it from here, a reference check. So here a6 looks absolutely quite standard. Or should black just get on with development with knight f6? Just for those interested here technically. Is a reference database too big to build here? Knight f6, 12 games. I would have expected there to be far more. Have we actually gone off track already? Okay, let's just rewind here. Bishop c4, queen d6. And the most usual is castling, over 4,000 games. So we saw knight c6, which is one of the most usual. Actually, the most usual is knight f6 immediately, not knight c6. 3,918 games for knight g8 f6. So knight c6, 317 games. Then we saw rook e1. Is that unusual? Well, actually, more usual is just trying to recollect the pawn immediately. So this frontal attack against the king is not that usual. It's 17 games only with rook e1, Tringov being the leading exponent. Knight e4 is also another move, 33 games, but the most usual, as I say, is knight 2 to b3. So this is quite an unusual path. And now we saw a6, only one game here. The most usual is knight f6. So Uhlmann's maybe taking some risk with a6 here. His king's still in the centre. And we've only got this reference game here. This is the reference game we've hit. One game after a4. So if we go back, knight f6, for example. There's 12 games here from this position, and the highest profile game is a Tringov game. No, actually, now there's 64 games. There's been a transposition. So quite a lot of high-level games now. Spasov against Hug is one of them. Nakamura against Nick DeFermian in 2003 from this position, where black actually won. So knight gf6, if we look at the Nakamura game, knight e4 was played, and eventually, black won in 41 moves. So it's a playable, but black in our main game here played a6, so we've gone off the rails now after a4. So queen c7, from an engine point of view, knight e4 here is actually a very good idea. Knight e4. Okay, so what is actually going on here? Is it too late, for example, for the e5? With the king in the centre, you wouldn't expect e5 to be working at all. Knight eg5 would be strong, and this is quite nasty. You don't want this. Knight e6 check. Advantage to white, big advantage to white. So it's got some dangers now. Bishop d7 was played, and we see knight takes d4. Now knight f6 is the engine recommendation here. In the game we saw bishop e7. It looks as though knight f5 is an exciting move in this position. So that early knight f6, there's a reason for it, maybe, to stop this business of knight e4, because that's the two knights are working together in this classic game to make sure that knight f5 is very effective, because this knight's going to deliver a blow knight d6. So if black had played knight f6 earlier, it would have prevented knight e4. With these two knights in the centre, they're actually quite dangerous for the poor king in this position. And now knight f5 is black's punishment, even though black's leading authority in the French defence. At move 12 here, he seems to be in a little bit of bother. After e takes, we see check, king f8, knight takes f7 is all fairly forced. There's no other continuation here. Bishop e8 was played, but the engine reckons knight f6 is again probably the best move in the circumstance. If we took the rook here, white's actually okay now. Say bishop e8, g3. What's the threat? What's actually black threatening? Rook d8, knight g4 threatens h2. So g3 blunts at least against knight g4. And white's technically apparently doing fine. So okay, so we saw bishop e8, which is slightly technically inferior, but not for the reason knight takes h8. Well, in the game, knight takes h8 wasn't played, and apparently it is actually okay for white. Knight takes h8 on this depth anyway. On this depth, it seems initially okay. Is it the sort of position one would want against the GM? It's better to knock out the GM with the game continuation, ideally. So this kind of continuation is apparently okay for white, but it's only half a pawn, so there's plenty of play left in the position. And if this knight can be munched later, not with g6 because there's bishop h6, but if it can be carefully munched, then that might be okay. Still tricky for black, and the advantage of white is actually quite minimal. So in the game, instead of taking that knight, instead of the knight taking the rook, we saw the move queen d5, an interesting alternative, which seems to promise just equality. So why is that? Because after queen a5, queen e6, the queen is subject to harassment, and with the powerful knight d4, black could also consider sacrificing the queen here for a reasonable position. He gets rook and knight, but okay. But knight d4, and this is what we should really check out now. Knight g5. If the queen was taken in this position instead of bishop takes, knight takes, and we have a fascinating way of drawing here. After knight f4, check, the black king really has to step back. If it steps forward, this is getting quite bad. For example, check, king f7, check here, winning the queen, or worse. Hold on a sec, check. Now taking the queen, leaves white with a very good position. White's +3 here. Two bishops, knight each, and two rooks. But the black king looks extremely unsafe, and this pawn is about to be lost here. So let's, for example, give black g6. I know it's not mentioned g6. Also, knight c7 check just immediately wins this rook, so forget that. Black has to move the rook. Okay, so what's so terrible here? Rook takes f5 check. Let's say knight f6, bishop b3. Well, it is 2 pawns up, and the black king still being hounded here in this position. It's not very pleasant. Okay, so that was an unfortunate consequence of going back here, of not going back rather. King f6 leads to trouble, and even worse, if king g5, if the black king wants to venture out, you'll definitely get mated. Check, and there's this way of mating the black king here. Check, check, and this would be embarrassing. Okay, so right, so now if in this position the black king does go back, then we just snag a draw from the GM opponent with check. We carry on just checking. So this is unpleasant for black. So he wanted to avoid that, presumably, this sort of thing, this perpetual check construction, and so he took on g5, and it looks fairly safe initially. It really looks as though there's nothing going on here. What is going on here? There's rook, bishop and queen, but there's this as the attacking piece, which is kind of obscured, as though we don't consider this bishop on c1 as an attacking piece here. I mean, after all, you know, the h6 square seems fairly well guarded, particularly in this position, by three things. It's like an optical illusion for safety, black king safety here. After queen d6 check, bishop e7. Just rook takes e7 is a crushing blow. What does black actually do in this position? Let's examine other alternatives. So it's actually an absolute false mate. If rook d8, rook f7, double check, and mate, so that doesn't help. Knight e6, rook takes b7, check, knight e7, queen takes e7, and queen takes g7 is mates, because that's pinned. That's the quickest mate anyway. So there's not too many defences here. So after knight takes e7, instead of knight takes e7, there's not too many defences. What can actually black do? And so knight takes e7 just allows this queen f6. It's a crusher. Apparently even bishop g5 is a false mate as well. That's fascinating as well, that bishop g5. But queen f6 is the absolute knockout blow, absolutely crushing, forcing move, bringing this piece as an attacking unit. The bishop's cutting out any king escape. So a fascinating game from Per-Ofstad, knocking out his GM opponent. Bit of an upset, because Per-Ofstad, amateur player basically from Norway, against a very strong grandmaster and exponent in the French defence. So to crush the French defence like this, and it was very good. It shows why an early knight gf6 from black is important to stop this kind of thing, like knight e4 was actually a very, very powerful weapon in this game, knight e4, for constructing knight f5. Comments or questions on YouTube? Actually, and I should say that, you know, it was after rook takes e7 that Uhlmann resigned, and that caused me some confusion. I didn't actually spot this until, again, looking at this game again. Blimey, queen f6. I didn't, you know, kind of hidden resource in the final position. Okay, thanks very much. Comments or questions on YouTube?